I put in some horse pastures with those high pop rotors. In fact, a couple of them, and we put the turf guards on them, the rubber tops, and they pop up 12 inches when they're operating, and then they go right to ground level. A little concerned, we didn't know how the impact of horses running across the field when they hit them with their shod hooves, what would happen, but they survive very well. We've never ever had to replace one, and we got them, they've been in those pastures 6-7 years now. So it does work. Pretty expensive installation. But it's a little 2-acre pasture. And shoot, it wasn't that many heads to cover 2 acres. And oftentimes people that are doing those kind of specialty things have plenty of money. That's not always the issue. The aesthetics become a big issue in that regard. They want it to look nice. And they want it to be, they don't want all those risers sticking up out in their pasture. It looks like a nice clean field, and then when the irrigation comes on, it just pops up out of the ground. It's pretty slick. Worked good, but it's expensive. So yeah, it's available. It can be done, and there's always new product line. There might be something out there today that I'm not aware of that has small impacts for orchard that way, and it would add quite a expense to the cost of the system. We have choices also when we look at on initial costs, some things that you don't always think of. You know, what pressure are we going to run these things at? We can take a center pivot and, okay, we're going to put a center pivot on this property. We're going to grow potatoes, and it's the right shape and the right situation and conditions for a pivot. Now we got a lot of choices on that center pivot that are they're going to be dollar issues that we're talking about. We could run overhead impacts and have to have pivot pressures of like 80 psi. Or we can run the other extreme, under truss low pressure sprays, or a LIPA system, the low energy. It's almost like a pivot drip system or pivot flood drip system, where they literally just let the water spill out the bottom of the pipes at almost zero pressure, and they just have drops very intensely along the pipe. And that system can run at maybe 30 pounds pivot pressure. Well, now we're trading a whole bunch of horsepower at the pump site, plus a whole bunch of energy to maintain 80 psi operating, say 2,000 hours a year, versus 30 psi operating at 2,000 hours a year. So we cut our power by 5/8, our power demand. We've cut our pump size by 5/8. So all of a sudden we got ourselves way smaller system. So if it took us like 100 horsepower to do the 80 psi at a pivot, which is not an atypical number, we might be down to a 30 horsepower unit to run the 30 psi operation, maybe 30 or 40 horsepower. So we have a huge savings in capital investment just on the power unit that we had to buy. We're going to pump the same gallonage. Pipe's going to be the same size. The ground and the crop still require the same amount of inches per day to match up the consumptive use of the crop. That never changed. It's just how we put it on the ground. So our horsepower is going to affect obviously our pump size. The pressure is going to affect the horsepower, which is going to affect the pump size. The flow rate never changed. And we look at golf course sprinklers. That's an issue on golf courses. Do we want to go with the 60 psi head or the 120 psi head? Well, you double your horsepower when you go to the 120 psi head effectively. But if it gives you better uniformity, it may be well worth it. And so that's choices that the architect and the superintendent have to make as to what's going to be the most effective, best use, and maintain the course at the level of play expected of the clientele. You know, if it's PGA West, they're going to expect a whole lot more from their system than would the Dayton golf course. So it makes a difference there. You know, who the client is. And many of you will get involved in that. Many of you will.